if they keep up this current pace, they'll go like 62, 14, and 6, somewhere around there, somewhere around the 130 point mark. A lot of talk about regression, and rightfully so. The team is probably not going to finish with 130 points on the season, folks. Let's talk about it. PDO, regression, looking under the hood. Let's do it, Harm.
Yeah, so it's the big debate in the market right now, especially because the Canucks are becoming one of the biggest stories around the entire NHL, that you have all sorts of people weighing in, trying to understand what the Canucks are, especially ones that don't get to see Vancouver as much. You know, that East Coast media that doesn't stay up. And they're looking at the numbers. And PDO is something that a lot of people are talking about. And I think it'd be great to sort of flesh out that conversation. First of all, start off by even talking about what it is, why it matters, because not everybody is a nerd like me and just invested in all these numbers. First of all, PDO, I don't know what it officially stands for. I don't know if it actually officially stands for anything. Might be percentage driven outcomes. That would
yeah, immediately guesses what it probably is. Like that has
I haven't
to be
heard an official
that's okay
definition.
I'll look it up.
Maybe
You
you
keep
look
talking.
that up. Anyway, it's considered a proxy for luck, right? PDO is the number you get when you add up a team's 5-on-5 shooting percentage offensively with their 5-on-5 save percentage defensively. So if your team's shooting 8% at 5-on-5 and you're getting 920 goaltending, you add that up, 92 and 8, your PDO is going to be 100. Now, the reason people talk about this is, you know, over a large sample, most teams' PDO typically settles around 100. You get some teams that, if they have an elite goalie, if they have high-end shooting talent, they can finish slightly above 100, right? And some teams that lack those attributes that will finish slightly sort of below that. But last year, for example, 25 of the NHL's 32 teams slotted with a PDO somewhere between 99 and 101.5. So it's a very narrow range. And so the point is, if your PDO is way higher than that sort of 100, 101 range, some people call that really lucky. If it's way below that sort of 99 range, a lot of people call that really sort of unlucky. And people are talking about the Canucks' PDO because it's 108.8 through 12 games, which is not only tops in the NHL, but I looked at it going back to 2007 since the stat has been invented. It's the highest through all those years. So that's why it's getting a lot of play. And we wanted to sort of look at the history of, okay, what teams had a really high PDO, got off to a hot start, and what happened to those teams, right?
Yeah.
When that regression hit, what sort of happened? Did they still make the playoffs? How successful were they? Before I get into the deep dive and what I found out about some of the Canucks' historical sort of matches, does that PDO explanation make sense? Did I simplify it enough?
It does. PDO also doesn't stand for anything. In business, sometimes it's protected designation of origin, but that's not what it means in hockey. And I googled in hockey and it said it doesn't stand for anything. And what did you say it was?
Percentage-driven outcomes.
That's got to be it. From now on, that's what it means. That's
Nailed
what it means. Let's make sure it sticks. And also, Grady just jumped in. I should have mentioned technical producer is Grady Sass. Yesterday, I spent a lot of time looking at my phone, trying to keep an eye on the YouTube live chat. We've got a new system in place, folks. Grady is going to be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you have any questions during this segment, we're going to be talking PDO today. If you have any questions for Harman or I, or you need something explained more, let us know in the YouTube live chat. We want to make this as accessible for everybody as possible. So if you need further explanations on anything being said, just put it in the chat. Grady's going to let us know. I'm not going to be keeping an eye on the chat during the show, but Grady's going to let us know privately here if there's something to be said, if someone has a question, and we will do our best to answer it. So back to the PDO conversation, Harman. We talked about it being an indicator of luck a lot of times. Are the Canucks really the luckiest team in the NHL right now?
They've had a lot of bounces, but this is where you get into the context of, yeah, people on the outside, statistically, they're the luckiest team in the NHL, but it's also a big part of it is their goal differential is insane, right? And one thing that I'm sure you're curious about is, okay, what's their PDO? And if you remove the blowouts, right? Mm-hmm. They've had 4 of those,
yeah,
right? And I wanted to crunch the numbers on that too. If you ignore the 4 blowouts, that's the 2 against Edmonton, the San Jose, and the 5-0 against St. Louis. All of a sudden, it comes down to 103.4, which is still high. Most teams don't finish with a 103 or higher PDO, but it's reasonable. Nobody would be talking about it as, oh, this is a massive red flag if it was 103. And if you still remove those four wins, which the Canucks deserve to win those games anyway, just based off merit, they'd still have a 5-2-1 record. So that right off the bat is like one of the main reasons. And this is the main takeaway from this conversation for me, is that it's an opportunity to explain why there's more than meets the eye with what the numbers say, and why, despite this really high PDO, I think there's substance here, and why I don't think regression is going to hit the Canucks too hard to the point where, we're worried about them epically collapsing and missing the playoffs, for example. Like, I'm buying this hot start. I'm not obviously buying them finishing this high in the Western Conference.
130 points. They're on pace for it.
Like, obviously, I'm not expecting them to fight for a Western Conference crown the entire year, but I am buying them as a playoff team and as legitimately sort of improved. And to go back to, I wanted to look at the history of what our teams similar to Vancouver's situation. I went back all teams since 2007 that had at least a 104 or higher PDO in their first 11 games and had a really hot start in terms of their points percentage.
Yeah.
12 of those 13 teams ended up making the playoffs. 12 of 13.
What was the one that didn't?
The 2021 in the 56 game season, Philadelphia Flyers.
Oh.
And you look at them on paper as well, that Flyers team was not as good, as deep, as talented, especially at the top end of the lineup, as the Canucks is one right now. So right off the bat, that's super interesting. And people have even brought up the Jay Fresh statistic about expected goals and whatnot. And this is the other part of the conversation. Even if you filter for high PDO, hot start record-wise, and bottom third of the NHL for expected goals, still 5 teams, 4 of those 5 got in. It's that same Philly team that didn't make it. And by the way, 2 of those teams that met all that criteria, the 2009-10 Washington Capitals, Bruce Boudreau, that won the President's Trophy,
yes,
and the 16-17 Blackhawks that finished 3rd in the NHL in the entire standing. So it's not just teams that are necessarily squeaking right into the playoffs. You have some legitimately good teams as well. The bad news is, all 4 of those teams that made the playoffs got eliminated in the first round, but we don't have to worry about that. We can have that conversation about the playoffs when you get there. And the other side that I wanted to sort of bring up was, expected goals keeps getting brought up. Expected goals, Canucks look bad according to some of those metrics. People are ignoring that. If you look at shot attempts at 5-on-5, Canucks are 11th best in the NHL at controlling those. They're legitimately above average. And in the early going, it's too early to know what to put more stock into sort of anyway. And that's part of it that's being sort of ignored, right? Like I saw Dom. I love Dom's work, but
you're about to make a lot of Canucks fans very happy. I love Dom's work, but continue.
Like he was referencing Vancouver's their actual goal differential compared to their expected goal differential, and some of those points are valid, right? The massive disparity, but it's like, okay, what about the other metrics at 5-on-5 that are still just as valuable from a predictive standpoint, that show the Canucks have legitimately been playing well and have legitimately improved since last season? And I feel like that sort of flies under the radar. And again, it just goes to my overall point that yes, the Canucks have had some luck. Thatcher Demko is not going to be like, I can absolutely see him winning the Vezina Trophy.
Sure.
Yeah, but we're not expecting him to be a 948 save percentage.
Absolutely.
Fair enough, right? But when you have this type of start, you have the other Pacific Division teams, some of them, especially in Alberta, scuffling in crisis mode, and you still have at the top of your lineup Pedersen, Hughes, excellent goaltending, and Demko. The above average special teams at the power play and the penalty kill looking legitimately improved. To me, there's enough of a foundation here that you can build from this head start and still be a really good team.
This is something we briefly talked about on yesterday's show, was that the cushion that the team has laid out for themselves now, it would take an epic collapse for things to fall and for them not to make the playoffs. And that's what I brought up yesterday when we were talking about regression very briefly, was I was saying, okay, well, right now, the power play, the 5-on-5 play, the penalty kill, and the goaltending is all going very well for this team. And Rutherford's famously said, if everything goes right, we have a playoff team. Right now, we have a playoff team on our hands in Vancouver. I think it's safe to say that. Now, because everything's gone right for so long, it's already been 12 games, and look, it's only an 82-game season, folks. because things have gone right already and things have also gone wrong for the teams below them, like you've pointed out, it's hard to imagine that all of the power play, the penalty kill, the 5-on-5 play, and the goaltending will fall at the same time. I also think the goaltending is the most sustainable thing about this team, and it's the thing we need to, kind of keep our hopes up for the most. I would say, like, there's going to be ebbs and flows with the power play, the 5-on-5 play, and the penalty kill. And yes, Thatcher Demko is not going to keep a 948 all season long, but it is the most sustainable part of this team. So when we have this conversation about PDO, Harman, I know you have a few more points I'll let you get to, but when we have this conversation about PDO, the thing I look at in terms of regression is, yes, the Canucks will regress from being a team on pace to put up 130 points in the standings. Yes, the Canucks will regress from a team that had a 9-2-1 start. Yes, all of those things are going to happen. Their PDO is very high while they are playing like that team that's going to go for 130 points in the standings, right? But another team whose PDO is very high is the Las Vegas Golden Knights, right? Like, they also have a very high PDO. Obviously not as high as the Canucks, and I think we buy a little bit more into the defending Cup champions' chances at being top of the Pacific team. But nonetheless, the Canucks are going to come down from this. But when they come down, I'm not convinced that it's going to be at a level where they all of a sudden start playing like a team ranked 15 to 20th in the NHL. Like, I still think this team can be a top 15 team easily for the rest of the way.
Absolutely. So just as a reference point, Don Lucian's model at The Athletic had the Canucks as roughly a coin flip to make the playoffs before the season, which sounded fair, sounded
Absolutely.
about right. Now they're at 90% odds.
Yep.
Because of, again, the hot start, the rest of the Pacific Division. So that just goes to show you, I mean, and it tracks with the history of the teams that I mentioned that had a hot start, and you were talking about, okay, they've got a really high PDO. Can this be sustainable? Well, it was good enough, at least for them to at least qualify for the postseason. And what's also interesting is when you look at that group of 5 teams that I'd brought up that had that hot start, really inflated PDO, and were sort of bottom third in the NHL at controlling 5-on-5 expected goals. The sort of, 4 of those 5 made the playoffs. 2 of them were in, when you look at the 1920 Predators, they just kind of snuck in. Same thing with the 2009-10 Abs. And then, of course, I'd mentioned the President's Trophy winning Capitals and the 16-17 Blackhawks that finished third in the NHL. What's interesting is when you look at those Washington and Chicago teams that really sort of took off and finished that high in the standings. And what I referenced about the Canucks being sort of 11th in the NHL for controlling shot volume, it was the same thing for Chicago and Washington, where expected goal models hated them, but for shot volume, at least at 5-on-5, they were like just outside the top 10, similar to how the Canucks are right now. And when you look at sort of Philly being the one team in 2021 that missed the playoffs, having that same profile, their shot volume, they ranked dead last in the NHL, I think, or 30th, maybe second last. So it just goes to show you that if anything, the Canucks are sort of, at least statistically, their profile doesn't match like the one team there that missed the playoffs. It matches closer to the upper echelon that went on to, be really successful. And again, I'm not saying the Canucks are, like, I'd be shocked if the Canucks finished top 5 in the overall league standings.
Sure.
I'm not saying they've got that type of ceiling, but this doesn't have to be a team either that is just squeaking into the playoffs. There's a lot to like here, and I think there's legit substance even just watching the team play. Like, honestly, if I feel like people who are outside this market, and I saw Charlie O'Connor, who used to be a colleague at The Athletic, really smart guy, but
really?
Man,
are you sure about that?
Well, he was getting flamed by Canucks Twitter, talking about the PDO and how he expects them to regress hard. Number one, I just wanted to say, this is one of those rare moments where things are going well. Canucks Twitter is united. Yes. It's really united. Usually it's split and we're like fighting amongst each other. This time everybody's riding high and it's just ready to like pick on other people. So this is a message for anybody outside Vancouver. Now's not the time to poke the bear. But yeah, I mean, I see legit substance here. Just, again, to sort of allude to people outside of Vancouver, if they just sort of watch the team play, especially with the history compared to last season. Again, I've referenced how much calmer and steadier they look holding leads. adversity when there's a momentum shift and the other team scores, instead of getting nervous and instead of compounding that change in momentum by shooting themselves in the foot, they're actually striking back and showing some backbone, which I'm not just referencing last season, but even the year before. I was on one of the road trips, 2021-22, at the start of the year where Travis Green was still coaching, and the Canucks just fell apart in that road trip. I remember Colorado scoring 1 goal, and for the rest of the game, it's just like the tires deflated from the team.
Yes.
It's just like those intangibles that you sense something's different. As well with just how bought in the core seems to be with playing this team first mentality. Nobody's cheating for offense, which honestly we've seen in years past. Guys
Yep.
cheating for offense, not as much commitment to defensive play. I mean, it's been like, Brock Besser in that Dallas game, for example. I'm seeing this guy on puck recoveries, like skating as fast as he can and trying to throw a big hit on Esa Lindell. And
Yep.
not that hit turned out particularly well because Lindell is built like a pole, just so big and strong. But you see moments like that. You see moments like him making in the third period an intense, defensive check in the third period to take away a slot shot. And it's just like, this is the type of buy-in that I don't think they had from the core in years past. And I think that those things make a difference too.
Yeah, the eye test definitely backs up the saying that, yes, this team is playing very, very well right now, and there are going to be some things that take a step back, but they are playing well enough that you don't think that all of those things are going to fall off at once, right? I think, and we'll close out this segment on this, knock on wood, of course, but I think what this team really needs to prepare for, and, as much as we're talking about regression, what could really affect this team is an injury to a
Yeah.
key player, because
Yeah.
they've improved their depth, don't get me wrong, but I still don't love their depth in terms of who are the guys who are replacing your stars, right? And I know this is basically true of every team, but like, knock on wood, of course, but if a guy like Quinn Hughes or hell, even Philip Hronik goes down, this team is in trouble. If Mark Friedman goes down, this team might be in trouble. Like, that's where we're at right now. And again, in trouble is definitely a exaggeration, but I think the guy replacing Mark Friedman makes you a worse team. I think it's safe to say that. And look, that's going to happen. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I just think that I'm not so worried about this team regressing and, falling off of the playoff bar or anything like that. I start to worry about it if there's an injury. And I mean, of course, we'll get there when we get there. Injuries are going to happen, but that's why it's so important to have the depth that the Canucks are trying so hard to build, right? Like, Teddy Bluger's not even back yet, right? Like, Teddy Bluger makes this a better team. And you've got the AHL leading point getter in Arshdeep Bains down in the minors right now. He's going to be able to come in, maybe make an impact this season on a fourth or third line in a bottom six role. Maybe next season he's able to actually make that jump, but they're developing their guys to be able to go play in Vancouver. And that's something they focused on a lot at training camp. It was a lot of the messaging was that Colleton and Tocchet are really on the same page. And just as an organization, obviously we know there's a lot of, I don't know the word, like it's fluid. Everybody is on the same page, pulling on the same rope. But especially when it comes to the coaching staff, and we've talked to some Abbotsford players about this on the show. We'll get some more on the show soon too. But they all say, like, when you go up to Vancouver, you know what's going to happen because they are playing a very similar system and style of play down in Abbotsford as they are in Vancouver. So that when guys come up, they're not lost. They're not trying to learn a bunch on the fly. They know what's expected of them because they have that communication from the NHL to the AHL level. I just think that's so important.
And that's why when the team's healthy, it's huge to just bank as many early points as you can get, because especially in this league where even losses are rewarded with points if you can push it to overtime or a shootout, it's just so hard to make up ground. I mean, you think about the type of hole when Bruce Boudreau took over, the Canucks were in, and how hot they were the rest of the way. It felt like the Canucks were perpetually somewhere between like 3 to 7 points out of the playoff race. And people would sort of have this optimism about, oh, they're only 4 points out.
Yeah.
But when you have that many sort of competitors and the teams above you, they're still, even when they're struggling, they're able to like squeak out an overtime point here, shootout point there. And obviously they're still going to win games here and there. It's just so hard to pull ahead once
Yeah.
you're behind, and that's why this early cushion is so massive for this team.
And I think that's what the Alberta teams are about to find out is once, because look, we see the Oily boys, they're still very positive out there. Our colleagues, they're your colleagues now too out in Edmonton. They're like, oh, they're just unlucky. It's just a bad start. It's hard to dig yourself out of that. Canucks Conversation with Harman and Quads every weekday at 2 p.m. Be sure to check it out on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. And if you missed it, go check it out on your favorite podcast catcher app.